Welcome to Blind Shovel, an arts and music podcast. Today I speak with designer and illustrator Brett Stenson. Hope you enjoy. Yo.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
I'm good.
So you live in Portland?
I do.
Is that where you're from?
No, I'm originally from, I guess from is like a long-winded conversation because my dad was in the Army. So I would say I'm originally from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, but before like 8th grade, I lived in Alaska, Massachusetts, Hawaii, and Minnesota. So I kind of have like I guess like a long list of places I could potentially say I'm from, but I guess I consider Milwaukee to be like the primary home base, if you will.
Yeah. What's it like to have an Army dad and make art?
At first it was kind of, he was pretty supportive of it when I was in probably like 4th or 5th grade. Him and my stepmom at the time, his wife, they would pay for me to like take painting classes and stuff like that. And then I think as I got older, maybe I wasn't as focused on art. So when I told him I wanted to go to art school, he was pretty like confused by it. He's like, what are you going to do? But now like my dad's so proud of me. Like he's so stoked, especially when it's something that he can like relate with,
Totally.
Like outdoor stuff or fishing, or I used to do a lot of motorcycle stuff too. So, and he rode my motorcycle, so he was obviously like instantly connected to that. But yeah, I don't know.
That's cool.
It's kind of like a weird, there is like a lot of crossover with my family, or like, I guess I'm on one side of the Venn diagram and my family's on the other when it comes to art. And there's like a few things that overlap that they really understand, but then some of it just like, they don't really understand it or get why I think it's cool or whatever. So I don't know.
Well, I think design is always a good bridge to the parents, at least in my experience.
Yeah, definitely.
Or doing like an illustration for something they've heard of that often you don't feel that connected to or that proud of, but it's a more tangible connection. At least that's my experience.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like I did a bandana for REI like a couple months ago, and my mom, I swear she bought like 20 or 30 of these bandanas for like people in my family. And it's just so funny because it's, for me, like, yes, it's really cool to do a project with REI or, anybody that's like a big, like visible brand, but it's just funny because like the stuff that I'm super internally proud of, it's like some carving of I'm carving a radio station right now. And it's just like so arbitrary probably to anyone else. And it's like a standalone product that doesn't necessarily have like maybe the same celebrityness to it or whatever, like, oh, my son has a thing in REI. That's like way cooler to my mom's friends than, oh, he carved a radio station out of wood. I don't know. It's kind of funny, but it makes me laugh.
Yeah. Absolutely. That actually makes me think. So what were you doing in high school? Were you more focused on design or art?
To be honest, I was like really into music and I rode BMX. So I was probably I wouldn't say I was more focused on art than design by choice, as much as I didn't really know design was a thing until I started paying attention to the BMX brands that I really liked. Like I would buy a hoodie from Little Devil or S&M or FBM or all these other like bike companies. And I think I started to pick up on the fact of like, I really like illustration and I like lettering. And I think it took me a long time to realize through, I don't know, I guess experience or paying it closer attention to your own feelings or something that, oh yeah, I actually really do like design too. So I don't think I figured it out until senior year of high school. And, like going to shows and stuff, I was really into the hardcore scene and metal scene in Milwaukee when I was in high school. So I feel like the combination of those two things got me really into whatever that crossover of design and art is. But
and you proceeded to go to art school for?
I did, yeah.
I went which to major?
Well, it's so funny because I actually went to school for industrial design first. I don't know why. I think because I wanted to do something that felt close to, it's kind of weird. Like at first I wanted to be a welder because I wanted to make bike frames. And my dad was like, you're not going to make any money being a welder. Like you're just not. Well, odds are he's probably wrong because I'm sure you can make great money as a welder now. But yes. It's a harder gig than maybe he wanted me to have to do. And then from there, I decided, okay, well, if I'm not going to be a welder, I'd like to be the next closest thing, which is like an industrial designer, which I don't know why I thought that was the next closest thing. But so I wanted to like design cars or maybe design bikes at like Trek or Specialized or something. Because biking was like my life from when I was 5 until I still ride every week. And then when I went to school, the first year of college, I went to MIAD, which is the Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design. When I went there, the first year, you don't necessarily get into your major yet. You kind of pick a lane in terms of like, do you want to do fine art or design? But you don't really make any clear choices about your major until sophomore year. So for that first year, I was meeting new people and made a lot of friends with like more of the illustrator kids than the industrial designer crowd, I guess. And my friend Micah actually on registration day, he was like, dude, are you sure you want to do industrial design? Like you actually like to draw like art. You don't want to just draw products all day, do you? And I was kind of freaked out because it was obviously like a very pivotal moment to change my mind, like the day of registration. But I did. I said, okay, I think you're right. Like I could probably have a lot more fun and feel more satisfied like doing this illustration thing rather than like, I make the joke of like, rather than, doing sketches of shampoo bottles or, I don't know what else. You don't really know until you get into that field, but industrial design isn't just the most glamorous, like, drawing the interiors of cars or, like it's not all sexy. And I think I had this delusion that it was going to be. And I don't know.
Did you find illustration to be sexy as a major?
I think I did because I just felt like it was so expressive. It felt like there weren't any rules. Obviously with industrial design, it felt like there was a lot more. There was ergonomics, there was engineering, there was material costs and I don't know, a lot more like stipulations around what you were doing. And with illustration, it felt like there were a lot less rules, and you could develop a style, and you could play around with certain mediums. And did your drawings have line work, or were they shape based, or were they, watercolor or whatever? Like you could kind of, I don't know, you could just like pick whatever lane you wanted, and it didn't have a lot of rules surrounding it. So
what would you say you learned in art school when you majored in illustration? Because I majored in illustration as well. I actually ended up with a drawing painting degree though. And,
cool.
But I really just went to school for illustration. Painting isn't in the school I went to. Painting was just a joke, and so I kind of dropped out while not dropping out because I wanted the degree, but I also wasn't ready for the target marketing aspect of illustration. I didn't feel that I was ready to kind of converge and narrow down what I was supposed to be doing. And actually, in hindsight, I think that was the correct thing. But I always say what I learned was a really sound process, the ability to communicate with a client, but almost nothing else. So sometimes I joke that I wish I went for industrial design now that I do a lot of fabrication stuff. But what would you say you learned, like tangibly, from that major? Because I think most people hear that and they, as a major, they don't even know it exists sometimes.
Yeah, that's so true. Because like a lot of people do it either how you did it, tangentially through, I'm a painter, but I like this kind of painting, and then you jump into more of a commercial side of drawing. I don't know. Like for me, to actually finish the other half of that story, I left illustration. Like I went into the illustration degree, and then second semester junior year, I switched to graphic design because there was an aspect of our curriculum that I really actually didn't like, and it made me learn a lot about. I think like I saw older illustration styles, and I was like, I like that. Like I like these weird geometric things from the 30s and 40s, or I like weird mascot drawings from the 20s for like old baseball teams or whatever the thing was. And that wasn't our curriculum. Our curriculum was more about video game design, or like the first steps into animation. So it was like very whimsical, and a lot of it was, there was a lot of anime in our department, and I didn't feel like, like the illustration that I saw around me that I really liked, like throughout the world of illustration, that stuff just wasn't in our school. Like, I don't know why, it just never happened. Like the teachers weren't geared for that kind of illustration. Like obviously every teacher has their own, like style that they like, or the background that they come from might not lead them to teach the style that I liked. So I ended up actually leaving that department and going into graphic design, because I felt like, well, if I can leave the graphic design degree and learn a bunch from being a designer, I think I can fuse the two. And then I'll be able to do the things that I actually like. So long story short, I feel like what I learned most was honestly like what I didn't want to be. I learned a lot about like, I guess, shaping the person that I wanted to be in the future based on the experiences that I had at the time that weren't really vibing with me.
Strangely, I feel similarly that I learned via that major what I didn't want to do, which is a strange, maybe because it's so vague. I just went in thinking I like books and I like the drawings I see inside of books.
Yeah, I can see that from you for sure.
That was my reference. It was just, And then I realized, that is definitely can happen. I did editorial illustrations that were just based off of narratives. But interestingly enough, I probably had a similar disposition as you in school, but I was being taught from the golden age illustration perspective of like the 20s and very realist and very formal, which in hindsight I'm grateful for, even though my work really doesn't show that much. I think it's like good to have those fundamentals. And the teachers weren't kind of making work I respected or liked very much. But, I was very curious. So I would make friends with people in different departments. I was getting into graphic design, but everything I liked was like art graphic designers like Sagmeister or people directly in the middle. And to this day, I still feel that that's kind of the most impactful artists for me, those art designers. And then, but I found that graphic designers knew nothing about anything related to actual art or artists or like the peak of their expression. And I came to conclude that most of them were just being told by their parents that they had to go into that department because they could make a living. Now I'm obviously generalizing like crazy, but I just remember talking to a lot of them being like, there's something odd about this department, at least in my school.
Yeah. I mean, you said a lot of great things there. I feel like the path for a graphic designer is it can be either so boring or so exciting depending on who you're influenced by and who's in your court as far as your family, your professors, whatever the people are in your life that are, shepherding you along. Because I know designers that are making killing and, they just build decks all day. They don't necessarily have like an art practice or care about it. They just, or they like do WordPress or whatever, like simple edits for websites, or they'll do brochures for, agriculture or something. So there isn't really a need for them internally or externally to be an artist. And maybe that's based on who they were influenced by. You were saying like, like your influences were maybe more like from books and then you're saying like Sagmeister. For me, I was obsessed with Juxtapose magazine. I was obsessed with High Fructose magazine, who I ended up actually working for at one point. And like that sort of urban, not fine art really. It was like lowbrow fine art, I guess you'd call it. That sort of perfect zone of graphic, like Tim Biscup or, all those, like that whole era of people, Barry McGee, like all these people they were illustrators, they were designers, they could do lettering, they could draw, they had a sense of composition. And there was something about it that was like easy to digest, but also it was deeper in some senses if you wanted more of it, like if you wanted more from it. So that sort of stuff was super inspiring to me. And then I just kept digging for more of that. And then, like when I left school, I had an internship junior year. I went to a sports marketing agency in Milwaukee for 5 years. And they were like, they knew that I was really into design. Like that was my life. I wanted to do it all the time, and illustration too. And a lot of the time they couldn't find work for me to do that would keep me, feeling satisfied, because I was trying to do something that most designers that go to school, they would have gone to that job and been like, yep, this is perfect. This is a design job. This is what I signed up for. And I went into it thinking like, no, I want to be like a Sagmeister. Or I want to be like, a Young Jerks where I work now.
Right. Milton Glasser.
Yeah,
I assume these kind of that era of illustration. I think as you talk about it, it makes me realize that one of the simplest ways to explain it is there's people who are comfortable with certain forms of compartmentalization, and there's people who aren't. And it sounds like both of us were just seeking a slightly more holistic expression of design, in the sense of it should be something you yourself are invested in. You're not doing layouts for a pharmaceutical company or something. You're doing designs for music, like bands you like or music you like, or brands that you would actually use. And that intimacy tends to breed, better work, I think. But it's just strange because it doesn't seem like it's asking for much, but I don't think graphic design is often centered around that, because most of the time you don't need a graphic designer to be expressive within the context of a corporate setting, I assume.
Totally. Yeah. Your primary focus is to sell something, or it's like call to action, or like these very simple commerce-based tools for how to make successful graphic design in a corporate setting. But I think you're right. Like when I work with, when I think of like the path of people that I've worked with from the 2004, whenever I started doing it, until now, it's always been a choice of, I'm going to work with this person because I believe in them and I feel like it's going to influence my work, or it's going to allow me to say something about me through this work. And I don't know, there's something like really wonderful about that. But I know that in a lot of cases for designers, it's not always available to them. Like a lot of people I've met at conferences that work at like a design shop in Kansas somewhere, they don't have that access. They're like doing designs for the county board or whatever whatever the simple thing is. And they don't always get the opportunity to do that expressive part of design. And that's it. Part of me like really hurts for them, but I also know it's not always what the gig calls for, I guess. And
and it's not always, if we're being honest, I think it's not everyone's appetite is as particular. Like some people might just be happy doing that. And not everyone has a vision that they need to impart. Sometimes people fit into a vision, and to assume they do is just like, it doesn't seem accurate to me.
Totally.
These bigger structures actually need people who aren't, I don't know if it's interesting in this. I mean, it is in a sense, because the work isn't expressing their idiosyncratic nature. But maybe at a larger scale, that's at a service to something bigger. Like animated films don't need everyone doing their own style. It would be chaos,
Yeah, that's true.
But that's actually interesting. I would like to hear about that journey, because ending up at the Young Jerks seems miraculous in some ways, just because I think it's an amazing place to end up, to be. They're doing very unique work. And I'm kind of curious what you had to go through to get there.
Oh man. Yeah. Is
it a long story?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's not super long. I feel like it is kind of funny though. It feels like something came to fruition that I had worked for probably 10 years, without even them really knowing. But yeah, I started that big sports marketing agency. That was like my first big design job. I had like a couple freelance gigs before that were, some were cool, some of it was a nightmare, but it was all good learning experiences to do that like weird young 20-something-year-old design work, because I got like my pricing figured out. I got my people skills, soft skills. I was kind of I was a wild person in college a little bit because I was like leaving home. My dad was a pretty like strict military dad. So like once I left the house, I was like, oh, there's no rules. I can just do whatever now. And, took that to the nth degree and then finally reeled myself back once I was, 25 or something. But anyway, so I like did all this freelance stuff, got this big corporate job, and that sort of made me realize, okay, there's rules about how you treat design work and then how you talk to people and selling work. And I learned a lot there. I feel like there was a lot of people that I still talk to this day that feel like family to me in healthy ways. And from there, I realized like, okay, I want to be like an illustrator designer. I don't want to do this corporate, like I did stuff for Marlboro for like 2 years. I did stuff for Lowe's and NASCAR and like stuff that I didn't feel any attachment to it. I didn't feel excited about it.
It's worse to work for Lowe's than Marlboro, I think.
Yeah, it's
I'm kidding.
It wasn't fun for me at all. And then, so during that time, I was freelancing at night, pretty much, 3 or 4 nights a week, sometimes 5 nights a week, depending on how busy I was. And I got really obsessed with being able to see if this illustration thing could go somewhere. And in 2013, I left and went on my own, and I, through like the murkiness of trying to navigate what it means to work for yourself, I had met this other design studio through a friend of mine called Jolby. They were called Jolby and Friends at the time, and we shortened the name later, but they were like a pure like illustration design studio. Like we drew all day, every day, constantly, always drawing. As soon as I started working there, I didn't realize that, oh, I have to draw every day, because when I was at the first agency, I was drawing once in a while and at night, or like the meat and potatoes of my gig was to just do page layouts for like big box stores or whatever. And this felt like, oh my God, this is so exhausting. Like I didn't realize how hard it would be to draw every day. And so I was there and worked there for 7 years. And I think, our style there was very kind of like bubbly and fun and like almost like Nickelodeon or like Adult Swim sort of feeling, like very, it had like this animated quality to it that people came to us for, because that's kind of what we were known for. And I think during that time, I was kind of conflicted in myself as a designer and illustrator that came from Milwaukee, where we had a lot of ephemeral design. It was an old city full of graphic design. Like Milwaukee is full of it. There's old beer brands. We had Schlitz, Miller, Blatz, Leinenkugels. We had all these, big factories. We had the Harley Davidson, like they started in Milwaukee. So we had all that advertising from that era. So there was like this part of me that loved vintage inspired graphic design, but then I also had this other like weird Nickelodeon brain side of me that I could do at the same time. And I think there came a point where I wanted to figure out, how can I fuse these two things together, of like silly, weird drawing and then also ephemeral, esoteric graphic design stuff from who knows when. And I think it was around like 2015, or no, it was 2013. I had found Dan Casero online somewhere. Of course, never talked to him because I was scared and, like intimidated, like pretty much every graphic designer is that way. But I really liked his lettering. And then I had met Dan Christofferson on my move to Portland in 2014, because I moved here to take that job at Jolby. And I loved his work, and I kept following them for years. And there actually came a point where when I was at Jolby, I wanted to try to keep shifting our work into this zone that I had imagined in my mind of, like, what if we did vintage inspired type, or like more historically referenced lettering, I guess you could call it, instead of vintage, but like had a root in some timeline, but then remix it with like different illustration on top of it to give it like this brand new feel. And I think, everyone that was in that studio was talented in different ways. And maybe my vision was, I don't know, it was, maybe I was doing a bad job of like trying to lead us in that direction or something. And it just felt like it was hard to like pull us that way. And I just kept feeling myself like, I wish I could just work with the young jerks. I wish I could just do that, because I feel like they get it. They get what I want to do. Like, they understand the world that I want to be in from a design standpoint. Maybe my stuff's a little bit different, but I think they'll understand. Like, if I could just work with them, I feel like they would understand it. So, sorry, this is a long story, but
it's fine.
So yeah, like, I think it was 2018, Dan Casero hit me up on Twitter, and he's like, "Hey, when are you going to move to New York?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, we want to work with you." And I had never talked to Dan before, but he had been following me for a long time. And I was like, "What? This is insane." You have no idea how long I had been thinking about this internally, like trying to figure out a way to, I don't know, have our paths cross. And I never imagined that they would have like an opening or whatever to work with, to have me work with them. And so then during COVID, I decided I wanted to go on my own. I was kind of, everyone in COVID had a moment of like, they wanted to become a beet farmer, or they wanted to build canoes for a living. And I think I just wanted to do a smaller degree of change of, I'm just going to go on my own and just do art and see what happens. And I think it was like a week after I announced that I had left, the Dans hit me up and they're like, "Hey, we didn't know you were leaving Jolby." I was like, "Yeah, I'm just trying to see what I can do on my own. And, I don't know, we'll see what happens." And they instantly were like, "Well, what if you just work with us for a while and just try it out and see if you like it?" And I've been there for 3 years now. So yeah, that's how it happened. Kind of crazy.
Nice. Yeah, no, I'm just processing that story.
Yeah.
So when you say art, like you were going to hypothetically take time off to make art, are you referring to the sculptures? Or what is your conception? I mean, personally for me, there is overlap between art and design, but I do feel that my brain has to make a pretty clear switch process-wise. And sometimes I'm imagining the angel and devil on the shoulder idea, because sometimes I feel like the wires get crossed and the process can become inefficient, maybe in a good way.
Mm-hmm.
I had to get comfortable from a design perspective, being a little more overt about looking at references of other things that I was gonna kind of copy. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I would never do that in art. To this day, I don't do studies of art or paintings. Design-wise, I will collect reference, and it almost seems like the challenge is me getting comfortable with the degree to which I've altered or remixed the raw material.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if that's right. I don't know if that means I'm a bad designer, honestly. But there is some weird tension there that I don't find in art. I don't really worry about it at all when I'm making art, but I'm kind of curious to know how you split those two different things, or if they're not so split for you.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel like I am a sponge when it comes to things that I see. If they tickle me in a certain way, I store it away in the back of my head, and uh, stuff just comes out of me at some point, whether it's through design or art. So like the reference stuff, like with design, I reference tons of different stuff all the time. I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I think it's like it depends on like your level of referencing, I guess. I've definitely in the past like felt like, oh man, I love this style or I love this thing. And then I'm like, holy shit, I've been drawing like this a little too much or a little too close. And then I feel like myself having to blow it up in some way, whether it's drawing it a little differently or pulling back and reevaluating my connection to it or whatever. For some people, they may see it and be like, I don't see what you're talking about. But when you feel a connection to something, and then you feel like, okay, I have to reevaluate my connection to my inspiration. But
it's too close. Yeah. Do you ever get that with art?
I feel like with art, I'm so new to just doing the art thing. Like with my sculpture stuff, I've definitely had people say like, "Oh, these feel like alebrijes," or "These feel like, like Scandinavian carvings," or "These feel like whatever." Everyone has like a feeling of like, I don't know, like they want to position it somewhere.
Sure.
And I get it. Like I have sculptures in my office right now that are from all over the place that I feel like myself referencing maybe simplicity or a painting style on it or something like that. But that was something that I had referenced like maybe 4 years ago. And now I don't necessarily feel that connection to the reference anymore because now I don't look at it. I just make what I feel in my heart to make, if that makes sense. It's like the reference started in the beginning, but then I've done my own version, changing it that it doesn't feel like it's connected to the reference anymore, even though I know what I was inspired by in the first place.
Yeah. I think there's like a delicate, that makes sense. And I think especially when you're referencing, like you were saying, historical lettering or design work, there is a strange challenge at hand where you don't want to just replicate it. You have to innovate it somehow.
Yeah. But with art, it feels like it's a little bit harder to do that because there's a sensitivity. I think with graphic design or design in general, it feels like, well, it's all just to sell something. Whereas like art can be spiritual, it could be cultural, it could be, historically significant. There's elements of it that it's a lot more, like there's a lot more consideration to put into it versus if I just reference like some old beer lettering, no one's going to care. No one's going to feel like, oh man, that's problematic that you had been inspired by this beer can. Like no one's going to care. But for me, like if I'm inspired by, some painting and it is meaningful to someone else culturally, when you first look at it, you don't know. You just see a painting, and then you have to dig deeper and realize, oh, this does have cultural significance to a group of people, and I have to be careful with that. Like I have to be respectful, and so that there's a big difference there for sure.
Do you ever feel that you are simply rescuing certain design relics by referencing them or unearthing them, almost like in an archaeological sense?
I think so. Maybe not.
You know what I mean? Because I feel like
yeah,
in design, it's more of a collective language.
yes.
And sometimes, I don't know if I'm giving myself a pass, but I'll find something very old and obscure, and I will feel almost the opposite, that I'm simply here to present it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that it's recontextualized with some, compositionally the layout is different, or just put it in a different setting, but I actually don't want to like just slightly tweak it and call it something I drew, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, I get what you mean. Yeah, I think so. Like, especially with design, there's so many different genres of design that I am fascinated by, and I know one that I've talked about a bunch is like QSL cards from the days of ham radios, and how like that design style to me it's my favorite. It's my favorite I've ever found, and it's all like weird little business cards that are made by somebody that has limited tools and technology, and that to me is really romantic and cool. And I find that using that same mentality in my own work of like, I only have so many tools and I have only so many colors, and maybe I should try to draw this as if I barely know how to draw, and having that as like a thing to share with other people is really fun. And I totally feel that way. I think I've had this in the past where, I'll draw something like from an illustration standpoint. There's a lot of like, how do I frame this? There's like, people will see something in it and then they don't know what to do with it, or they don't know how to place it. And I think it's fun to like bring forth graphic design that's from a cultural, like the zeitgeist that you're talking about. But I think when it comes to when you move into folk art as like a reference, people get weird about it. They get a little like freaked out, and they don't know like, okay, this feels like it's a cultural thing. Now I'm kind of a little nervous about it. And I've gotten that a lot, where I'll draw something and they're like, I don't know how to feel about this. It feels like it's from something. And it's the same mentality with design that we use, where we're like, yeah, we reference like a weird beer can that was designed by somebody that barely knew what they were doing. But when you do that with illustration, it can, for some reason, it doesn't land as well. It makes people freak out, or they're like, I don't know. Like, I can see references here and I don't like it or whatever. And it I don't know, it can be a little difficult, but.
Yeah, I myself have a hard time articulating what's going on there.
Yeah.
But I do suppose if you were, well, you said you're kind of from all over the place, but
yeah,
if you were, and I don't really believe in this logic like that, if you were from Milwaukee, you should only be playing with the language of Milwaukee. It seems ridiculously limiting and uninspiring.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't even know, especially when you're dealing with symbols, art often deals with symbols. So
right.
These like boundaries between, even what you were saying before about art is typically more spiritual. Mm-hmm. To me, there's design work that can achieve it as well. I don't know. Yeah, maybe I'm trying to think of graphic design that is transcendent.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose it is not. It's definitely not its primary objective. But I also don't even know if it's just to sell things. But maybe that's why I don't have luck selling a ton of things. I feel like I am often, my design is, when I'm playing around with it, it probably skews too much towards the art-minded, where it's maybe more self-interested than it should be.
Yeah.
And that's why it's interesting to hear about your education, which is much, much more design based in the sense of what you've gone through and the firms you've worked for and what their objectives were.
For sure. Yeah, I do feel like there are examples of like, I feel like they I don't know if I can think of them off the top of my head, but like transcendent graphic design, I think it moves into this world of like visual poetry, or I don't know, I think of like Sister Karita Kent, or you know, like Ed Ruscha or something like that, that it is graphic design in the sense that it's using typography to convey something that is much more spiritual and large than what's really on the page, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, the boundaries are, it's one of those things that's kind of goofy to talk about, even though I insist on talking about it, that the dichotomy is maybe false in some ways, that art and design are separated. I think commercial versus self-expression, sure, maybe more separate. But to me, the most interesting work isn't even aware of these boundaries often.
Right.
And that's where it's actually kind of confusing when I feel like, oh, I'm putting on the designer hat and this is the kind of process that begets design, and oh, I'm taking that off and now it's art, and this is the mode in which art occurs. Do you relate to that kind of, I have the tendency to kind of bifurcate things, but do you feel that you have to like switch modes, or do they flow pretty seamlessly in and out?
I definitely feel like I have to switch. Like when I'm making stuff for, like when I'm making artwork for myself or just making art, it has a very specific place it's coming from. Like I essentially have built a little microcosm in my mind that art is coming from. It's a projection from a very specific place, and it has its own area code and it has its own people and world that it's inside of my head, and that's where it's coming from. I built it over the last like maybe 6 or 7 years. It changes pretty often, but for the most part, it's a very specific place and feeling to it. But when it comes to, for example, like doing client design work, I'm very easily able to just turn off my art world that I have and that specific vision that place contains, and, you know, make something that looks nothing like me. It doesn't look anything like me. Like it doesn't, there might be hints of it that look like me because I just draw a certain way, or I have like a way of making shapes or a way of making things simple, but I don't feel like I have to force that personal artwork side of me into every project, because a lot of the time it's not necessarily the right thing for it. But I do find if I'm in one world too long and not in the other enough, I feel like I don't know, like I need a break from either every once in a while. Like sometimes I want to just do my personal thing because I have a vision that I'm obsessed with in the moment and I really want to do it. And then sometimes I'm like, okay, I've been in this world too long and I feel like I've worn out my welcome. I want to go out and explore a different style of design work that has nothing to do with this right now. And I think that's kind of how I flow in between the two.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think it's interesting that there's people who are completely comfortable without that diversity. They're just like, nope, I'm just that one thing and I'm going to keep doubling down on that. I definitely admire that because I don't have that personally.
I do too. Yeah. I feel like those people have become artists fully at that point when they have a vision that when they're using their like personal art as a vessel for all work they make. I think that's, we've talked about Bill Rebels before. Like, he's amazing at what he does, and I could have drunk goggles on and know it's Bill's work. Like, it has a feeling to it. I don't even need to see like the whole piece. I know it's Bill's, and I really admire the craft of an artist, like honing their design language, their shapes, their colors, what they're influenced by, like why are you painting this thing versus another thing? And I think that's like so beautiful. And I think for a lot of designers, though, they feel like that is the end goal for all designers, is to be Bill. And I think that, or, anyone that's of that ilk. And I don't know if that's necessarily the end all be all for everyone. And I think that that's kind of where there's a confusion from the start for a lot of younger designers, where they're like, oh, I see Bill's work, or I'm just using Bill because we're talking about him, but like, I see, Draplin's work or whoever, and I see that they do their thing all the time, and that's what I want to do. And I don't think they realize the steps in between, that designer made that choice at some point, that they wanted to be a designer that does their thing nonstop. And it's almost like everyone is coming to them for them to put their secret sauce in it. But I think there's also other designers, like I think of even like the Dans, their styles are all over the place. Like, they'll try something that I'll see something that they've made, and I'm like, that it looks like you kind of, but it's a new version of you that I've never seen before. And I think that that's also so cool, and a different way of being an artist, designer, or whatever you want to call it, where you can like almost reinvent yourself every time you sit down and make something, but take the tools that you've learned or whatever along the way, and it still feels like you, but it doesn't feel the same you, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, for me, that process activates almost the strategic mind, where you quickly look at something that you might have to riff on, and you understand the rules and the boundaries, and then you try to, like a chameleon, tweak it or improve it or innovate on it. And it isn't always adding to one's own language, like you're saying. I think Bill has his language, and it's very clearly his. And in working with you, I could see that was clearly one of your skills, that you could look at reference and then say, understand the reference like inside and out, and then apply it to the new context.
Right. And
I don't really know how that actually ends up coming back to one's art practice, because they're very different. I think art is also, obviously people are inspired when making art. And it's hard to talk about even tangibly, because, if you don't, and I will get spiritual with it because I think it's necessary, but if you don't get spiritual with it, then art is also just remixing and stealing and copying and making people not realize that you stole from 12 artists instead of 2, and they can't pinpoint exactly who you stole from. But I think there's something different going on in the pursuit of one's own voice, their own singular voice. And I feel like those modes can even get like, they can poke each other in weird ways, where I feel like when they cross the boundaries imaginary in my head, I can be disturbed by their cross-pollination in some abstract sense. They're just different. One's a very social and one's a very personal way to make work. And I don't even know if the personal way to make work existed for that long in history, because most of the time people existed in a very clear culture with a very clear language, and they learned that language and then they barely innovated on that language, more like what I was just describing.
Yeah.
And they weren't seeking this very, very specific thing that they call themselves. They were just carrying tradition while refining it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I don't know when that started, I guess, to your point of not just following tradition or following reference material and then carrying it on. I feel like it does feel new, though, for sure. But also there's something about, like the pursuit of making your own art, your own vision is very hard. It's something you have to want to do. Like, I don't know how many designers would want to do that despite seeing other designers doing that. You know what I mean? Like a Bill making his own like art style or whatever. That took so much of his own meditation on himself, his own inspiration, and honing it in, and probably repeating it to a point of madness in some ways, and then breaking it, and then all of a sudden, oh, I'm drawing people and their legs don't make sense, but I'm going to lean into it. I'm going to lean into it. I'm going to lean into it. And that is there's a madness that comes with that I don't know if everyone has that will to want to go that far. And yeah, it does use a totally different side of your mind to develop shapes or, subject matters or whatever the thing is, and keep pushing it. And I don't know, it's a totally different mindset than being a designer, for sure. Even though you could easily say oh, Bill's a designer, right? Like, he does commercial stuff. There's 5 layers below just putting it on a t-shirt, there's so much more personal. I feel that way with my work, my personal work. There's stuff in there that, I drew it because it was meaningful to me. And I don't know if it necessarily matters to you as a client, but it's there,
Right.
And I think that's where it can get a little sticky, where a client can say, well, I don't care about that. Take it out. And that's when it can feel more personal, like a personal attack or something.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's hard to talk about or go to school for the right major, because what we're talking about is really a process that's buried beneath the outcome. And if you just look at the outcomes, it actually doesn't always tell you much about what's going on within the artists themselves.
Yeah.
And so instructing people and giving advice, oh, you should do this, that, the other thing, I always find pretty difficult, especially in this topic, if someone is kind of fluctuating between the two. But so if you have that in mind, do you understand where you want to go in the future?
Honestly, I have been struggling with that quite a bit lately, trying to figure that out, because they're I think I'm getting decision paralysis from it a little bit, because I know there's a part of me that really admires specific artists for specific reasons. And then there's also the clear, obvious option of, I'm doing what I'm doing right now and loving it. What is there that I need to change? And then just the day itself feels like it's never long enough. And I think I've also grown up in a way that I don't necessarily see that I have the potential to do whatever I want. And, when I grew up in the Midwest, and my family, most of them are farmers. So the idea that, oh, you can just start a warehouse and like make all this cool shit all the time, and like there really isn't anything in front, like in your way except for yourself. That idea was kind of alien to me for a long time. So I think I'm starting to try to figure that out now with, do I want to do more with my art practice, or do I want to remain as a designer? And I don't know. I'm like having a really hard time figuring that out. But
the answer is probably both, right? But it's always an interesting question of how much and when and the balance. And, I ask people this question sometimes: if you had infinite money, would you keep doing, for instance, if I'm asking an animator, would you keep working in the animation industry? Oftentimes they say, no, I just want to make my personal work. Yeah. Some people do the jobs because they need the money, and it's a means to an end, although a fortunate and pleasurable one at that. And some people genuinely like commercial work for its ability to connect on a social level and with their parents and with their friends in a way that art often leaves you feeling isolated by.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with that. Like I love doing like wine packaging, or I don't know, things that like people, especially things that people eat, because there's something about it that is like it's very pedestrian in the sense that anyone can enjoy it. It's affordable art in a way, because it's, you're buying a wine for $20 and I spent 3 weeks doing the painting on the front of it or whatever. And I can be a little bit more personal with some of those things while still selling another product at the same time, which I think is like, for me, is kind of a cool, checks two boxes in a way. But if I don't know for a fact if I would be able to just be a full-time artist on my own, because I think there's a part of collaboration when it comes to like design work that I just love. Like I love other people's opinions, and like I love, or not even just like their opinions, but I like the feedback. I like, like I probably wouldn't be a stand-up comedian. I would probably be an improv comedian with other people. You know what I mean? Like I like that, like back and forth, push and pull. What did you say? Like, let's do that. Let's try this. That energy to me is so exciting. And that's why I have never really lasted very long as a freelancer, because I just get lonely, and I don't necessarily, I don't know. Maybe it's like I don't believe in my personal vision so strongly that I feel like it's correct and I need to be alone, like I feel like there's something about working in a group. It feels like a community. It feels fun and like invigorating. And I don't know, there's something about the art thing for me that it's a treat. It's a treat for me to express something in my own time. And if it's constant, I don't know how I would handle it, but yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure yet.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I was just curious to know if there's any other strange tangential temptations. I think some people, and I've come to learn that I don't really judge this as better or worse, but some people compulsively need to make stuff. Yeah. And then some people actually just like doing it, so they do it. And if they couldn't make art for some reason, they would be happy to do, I don't know, to bike around or build motorcycles or something.
Yeah.
So is there anything in your life that is as attractive as art making?
Oh, yeah. Definitely cycling. Like, I feel like sort of like from a very young age, I've always been connected to cycling. I think it's served as a form of therapy for me since I was young, because, my parents got divorced when I was really young. I felt like it was a way for me to sort out my thoughts. It was adventurous to me. I still am always inspired by it. It's a form of a different kind of challenge too, because I've been in design and, this career for so long. It feels like challenges don't land the same way as maybe the simplicity of, can you get up this mountain or not? Mm-hmm. And I feel like there's just something about it that I am obsessed with and have always had a strong love for it. I think if anything, I would love to do less of the work stuff that I'm doing and doing more of the bike stuff, because that is something that I've always had to put on the back burner, or like put it in second in line in terms of things I want to do.
Are we talking just biking around?
Biking, well, like I do races a few times a year. Not to like podium or anything, but just as a form of being a part of it. Bike packing. I do bike packing trips, and I've done a couple this year so far. And then I'm also in a cycling group now called Compass. We meet up every week and do rides. That was like a huge like explosion of inspiration for me, because I had been riding with a few friends around town for the last like 5 or 6 years. And then people moved, or like, schedules don't line up, and you feel like you're less and less able to meet up with people or ride together. And I joined this cycling group. Everybody in the group is like 24 to 32, and I'm almost 38. So I'm like the oldest by a few years. And to ride with like younger people that are way less, like concerned about what they're wearing, or, they'll just slap some shit together and go for a bike trip for the whole weekend. You're like, what, aren't you like, don't you need more stuff? And they're like, nope, I'm good. I'll figure it out. I think that there's like a liveliness to that sort of poured into me as soon as I started riding with them. So I don't know, like the cycling side of it, or the cycling side of my life, I guess, is something that's extremely important. I would say that's probably, we're talking about like spirituality, like that probably provides that the most, because it's my way of being outside. It's my way of, moving blood in my body, basically. And it's I don't know, it's something that's been always a part of my life since I was little. And I'm still doing it to this day, just on a different bike. And I don't know, it's kind of a weird thing, but it feels permanent to me. Like if I don't have this, what am I missing here?
That's interesting. So it's more spiritual than art making, biking.
I think so.
Wow.
Yeah. I think it's something that, like art making is spiritual it's spiritual in a way that I'm like pouring out this part of my mind. Let's say it this way. Art making is pushing out a part of me onto paper, or onto, wood, or whatever the thing is. And I think biking is where it comes into me. That's where it's the receptor of that spirituality. Whereas like the art making is the output of it. It's like a conduit out of my body. So I think that's kind of how I've always looked at that dichotomy of cycling is where I gain more as a person and fill myself up more. And the art is the expression of that, and understanding it and, putting it forward in front of someone else.
Yeah. My one artist friend calls that inhaling versus exhaling, which I think makes sense.
Yeah.
That you have to have that balance.
Mm-hmm.
And even, as we talk about it, I think that can feel the same way for me with design and personal expression. In that sense, I feel like I can draw more when I'm bouncing back between the two of them. Whereas if I try to just sit down and just do that one thing all day, I'm probably actually getting less drawing done ultimately.
Yeah. 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 I have like, when I'm designing something, I will sit down and get it done in the sitting. I'll just sit down at 8 a.m. and probably just not move the whole day and just finish it somehow. I don't know. I just get into a zone with it. But with art making, I have to do it in spurts. I can't do it the same way. Like when I'm carving something, I'll carve it and put it down and intentionally like leave it and don't finish it. Come back and look at it with fresh eyes, because for me, art making is me trying to convey something inside of me, and I need to find the right words. And I have like a weird thing with when I can't find the right words, it really frustrates me. Like even from a speaking standpoint, like I get tripped up in my thoughts because my mind is running 1,000 miles an hour, and then I'll lose where I'm going. But when it comes to like art making, if I don't say it exactly how I want to, like exactly the right words, the right colors, the right shapes, if I don't say it the right way, I get so frustrated because it's my voice and I want to say it the way that I want to say it. But when it comes to design work, you and I work together. I'm trying to harness your voice and
right.
And whatever you're trying to say. And it's, to be transparent, it's easier to take less responsibility over those words because they're not yours. You're trying to be the conduit for someone else's voices and feelings and whatever the thing is. So you almost can like feel less pressure or less I don't know if this is making sense, but like
it is. No, it's actually unlocking something for me. It explains why writer's block is pretty easy to get through, in my opinion, from a design perspective, but much harder from the art perspective.
Yes, it's very hard when you're trying to make art about you and your own voice. It's easy to think, well, that's stupid. Why would I make that? That doesn't feel right. That doesn't say the thing I want it to say. But when it comes to design work, if you have an idea for something, I'm taking that as like, that's the thesis. That's the thing. I don't need to argue it. I'm not going to say it's dumb or not. It is what it is. It's almost like like design work is less subjective than art, because at least someone's defining what you're doing and what you're doing it on. And with art, it can literally be anything. So it can be easier to psych yourself out and make you convince yourself that it's not what it should have been, or I don't know. But yeah, those two can be really tough to battle.
Yeah, that also kind of clarifies something else for me. When I stopped thinking about artistic expression as my own psychological expression and more as channeling of spiritual matter or muse inspiration, etc. I think I just started making much more work. And when it was good, I could step back, detach, and say, oh, that's good. And it wasn't about me per se. When it was bad, it was like, it wasn't personally insulting that it was bad. I just did a bad job translating something.
Right.
And it also reminds me of when I speak to musicians, oftentimes the first album is really hard for them to get out for this same reason. They feel that it's very reflective of who they actually are. As a just them. It's only about them. And somehow I do think that can really frees people up.
Yeah.
So I think like what you're saying, you could, I like the idea of kind of haphazardly playing with someone else's voice or feeling comfortable because it's not as, it's not about you. You know, you can kind of mess around.
Yep.
It's like wearing a mask. People are released from this, but it's also funny laying it onto the idea of a brand. Like, and honestly, if a brand is smart, they would hire you to act that way, to be kind of careless with your approach.
Right.
Because people can be very restrictive, I find.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and people get kind of scared. They don't see maybe like where you're coming from, and a lot of I've thought of, like, I'm thinking of projects right now where we have gone into it blue sky, kind of do whatever you want. That's what we're paying you for, etc. And, you know, Dan Christofferson and I will like go hard on some like weird concept, but we did it well, you know, like we finished it and it looks cohesive and we believed in it. Like we wholeheartedly believed in it. And then the client sees it and they're just like, this isn't, I don't understand what I'm even looking at, you know, like, and that's
a classic bait and switch that I find that musicians use all the time when you want to do like a album art or something. Yeah. Because they think, because they have opinions about making stuff. Oh, and so they can be even more hard-headed than some random corporation or something. But yeah, that I've experienced that many times as well. I think it's very funny. But I also, to be fair, I don't think people know what they want often. And definitely. And even if they do, they don't know how to say it. So it's not as if every client is trained in some high level of art direction. In fact, if they don't make things, I don't think I know an art director who's good who doesn't also make things. And in a corporate setting, I doubt you encounter many people who know what they want in this sense, you know?
Yeah. And to add to that even further, like I don't necessarily know if everyone is in on what the design language is that we're playing with, or why it's cool, or why, you know, irony is there's an element of irony in our work that we use pretty often, where we fully know we're borrowing ideas or design tropes from a place that if you did it wrong, it would look tacky as hell. Like it would look not good. It would look, you know, it would look out of place or something like that. But we try to use just enough of that irony to be like, yeah, isn't this kind of weird? But then you do it well with supporting stuff that, you know, supporting type or whatever, the color or something that flips it to a point of like, no, this is, you can take it seriously that it's good, but you don't have to take it seriously that it's like, that it's not serious design work by any sense. So whether it's through copywriting or, you know, subject matter or whatever the thing is. And I feel like there's a lot of people out there that come to us that they're, you know, they just own a bar, or they're just starting a juice company or whatever the thing is. And they're like, well, I don't have enough vocabulary in my mind for why this is good or not. You know what I mean? Like some people, they just come into it like, I just know what's successful out there, and I don't know how to fully believe in this thing that I don't necessarily have any idea of what's trendy or interesting about this, or what's anti-trendy about this, or, you know, like there's so much inside baseball with design that's a little bit outside of the world of what you've seen before. So I don't know. It can be really tricky to convince somebody like, no, this is actually going to be really cool, I swear. When of course it can feel like a little bizarre to them or something.
Well, I assume it helps being part of a very good studio that has tons of credentials and a large portfolio.
Yeah, I think
that's often the most persuasive thing I find. Just the context of that and the clout, basically.
Yeah, because I think, through it, just to use copywriting as an example, some of the copywriting that like this packaging stuff that we've done in the past, it's on its face is like kind of just dumb writing. Like it's not like, this brilliantly finessed, like overly thoughtful, whatever. A lot of it is like the slip of a tongue, like, and oh, well, this kind of rhymes and it's kind of dumb and clunky, but it's funny in my mouth and I think we should just go with it. And that like immediacy and almost confidence in how, some of the phrases come off like arrogantly wrong, but hilarious in how it's delivered, that people just come to us and are like, we like whatever that is, whatever that secret sauce is, we want more of that. And it's taught me, like before I came to Young Jerks, I didn't write ever. Like I didn't ever do any copywriting. So, but I've always liked writing just in general, but didn't necessarily have the confidence in it. And I realized pretty quickly, like it's all in there. It's just, chiseling it into the perfect taste level of brevity and smart wordplay and whatever the, like mixture and alchemy of time period connotations of like how it's written out, or I don't know. It can be like a fun game of learning about advertising copy from the history of advertising, basically, and then mixing that with like cultural references, like just our name, Young Jerks, like it's comes from Young Hearts Be Free Tonight, like that sort of wordplay stuff is really interesting, and it's different from anything I've ever done. So I don't know.
No, I think that might be the most distinct thing about the Young Jerks. It's like those things stand out to me. Those lines that those strange, they're like goofy and ironic and innocent in the sense.
Right.
Obviously the visual language is very strong, but that to me seems maybe the most distinct, oddly enough.
Yeah.
So it's funny you mentioned that.
Yeah. I think that's one of my favorite things about our studio is the way things are written. Yeah.
Well, I know you got a party with them around here, right?
I'm playing Magic the Gathering at 7. So
same thing. That counts.
It's a gathering, if you will.
And you got a show coming up, or did that already happen at Nucleus?
I do have a show. Yeah, it's October 5th.
October 5th.
Yeah, at Nucleus in Portland.
Anything else people should be looking at?
I don't think so. I have some like projects that'll probably roll out in the next few months, Young Jerks or otherwise. But no, I think mostly I'm just trying to work on my show, and I don't know. Once I finish that, I'm not sure what I'll do next, because the balance of just the time alone of I work all day and then I paint all night or whatever. I might take a little break for a bit, but we'll see what happens. But yeah, otherwise, I don't know. I'll just be around.
Right on. Well, good talking to you. Thanks for the time.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for organizing this. All right. So I'll talk to you soon.
Peace.
Bye.
Music by Dory Bavarsky and Mingja Chen. We don't know who's coming next, but they're coming. Have a good week.